Hello and blessings, everybody. Nico here, and we are back with another special installment of the Integrative Mysticism Podcast. And with me today, I have a special guest and psychic medium, Matthew Stapley. Matthew and I have been acquainted for a good while now, but we have been somewhat out of touch. Matthew is a born psychic, also a born medium, and has been, active and engaged with his gifts for decades. A little bit of background about Matthew. He's a public speaker. He teaches all kinds of mediumship and psychic development programs. He's the publisher of his own oracle deck, The Lantern of the Soul. Welcome, Matthew, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on and hang out with me today. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing? I guess we should know this about each other already, shouldn't we? Well, the world would think so anyway.
The world would think so, but I'm always telling people, hey, just because psychic doesn't automatically mean mind reader. And that's really important because there are different gifts out there. I'm doing all right. Just been kind of really hectic as we get closer to the holidays and all of that. I was going to ask you, just as we get going, I found you on Facebook. I noticed that you were, you do your weekly free readings. And I was curious, do you have, how do people get a hold of you if they, listen to this and they really like your style and they want to connect?
Sure, I guess the easiest way would be through Facebook because it's basically like my second home. So it would be Matthew Stapley on Facebook or facebook.com/canadianpsychic.
Okay. And how long have you been in business?
Oh, you know what? It's crazy. So I'm to put this in perspective. I'm 37 years old, and next year it will be 20 years since I started doing this professionally.
Right.
Yeah, I started when I was like 17, 18, somewhere in there. It's been a minute for sure.
And you've been, active in this again since before the internet. One of the things that really drew me to you was that you are somebody who is also, very kindred in that way, born on, your psychic abilities going. My mediumship abilities did not really start to kick on until my late 20s, but, I was having my prophetic dreams, been practicing magic since, the late 90s. When was your earliest experience of paranormal communication? How did this all get started for you?
I think I have to separate like my first experience that I remember and the first one that people told me about later.
Okay.
But the first one that I remember was about 8 years old, and it was remote viewing specifically. So my dad was traveling in Thailand, and I was in Carleton Place, Ontario, where I'm from. And he called to say hi to me and my mom and my brother and everybody. And I just remember like standing there waiting for to be my turn on the phone. And I just had this like build up of like this intense anxiety, maybe is the word you could use for it. And I remember getting on the phone with him, and before he could even know what I was saying, really, I said, "Dad, what are those big teeth sitting beside you on the table?" It was like elephant tusks, and how did you know they were there? And I just said, I don't know, I can just see them in my head. And he said, well, what else can you see? I started describing like the room he was sitting in and all of this stuff. But I think the part that apparently freaked him out the most was I said, oh, and yet outside the door, there's a fountain. And he said, no, there's no fountain. And I said, no, I can hear the fountain, Dad. Like, go look, there's a fountain. And so he went outside into this sort of courtyardy place, and he said, no, there's a swimming pool, but there's no fountain. And I said, no, Dad, it's by like the wall with a lizard on it. I can hear it. And I guess it was a wall that had, I don't know if it was lizard artwork or what on it, but he went over there, and there was a little rock garden. And then in the rock garden, there was like this little tiny fountain that was not even making any sound.
Nice.
And so that was kind of like the start of it from my conscious experiences for sure. And then it just got weirder after that.
That's a hell of a start, though.
It
That's a
it
hell of a
was,
start.
yeah. It was definitely weird. I remember my dad just getting really quiet on the phone, and he said, put your mom on the phone. I said, sure. And I found out years later that he said, go find the most expensive psychiatrist money can buy. Like something is really different about our kid.
Oh,
It was
well,
funny.
okay, let's talk a little bit about that,
Sure.
because um, you know, it is kind of difficult when you are born into it, even if your family is somewhat metaphysical.
Mm.
But I found that, I find that to be kind of interesting here because, like my mother was also a medium and a tarot reader. And so that, it was kind of, runs in the family. Your family went for help. So how did that reaction play out, and how long did that last? I mean, how did people react to those revelations about your skills?
So it's kind of weird. So to break my family down a little bit, so my dad's side of the family is like, from England and, all of that. My
Mhm.
mom's side was like Ukrainian and French Canadian. So my mom's side was like all over it. They were like, this is the greatest thing ever. Because in Canada, especially in a lot of French Canadian communities, people go to church on Sunday, they walk out of there, go to the tarot reader's house. Like
Yeah.
it's very cultural. Ukrainian, maybe even more so. And so what I found out, as I got older, was actually I wasn't the only one in my family. For some reason, my mom never told me that as a kid, but as I got older, I met, like my grandmother's sister who could read cards, and I found out things about my grandfather's mother and all of this stuff. So I think at a young age, I felt kind of isolated with it. My mom immediately accepted it and thought it was the coolest thing ever. My dad and his family was really unsettled about it. And it
Mm.
wasn't that they thought I was evil or like they thought I was crazy. They just had no idea what to do with it.
Okay.
Um, and then it just kind of kept happening, and weird things would come out of my mouth that were a little uncanny. And I think the older that I got and the more people I was able to help with this, the more excited my dad got about it. And after my mom passed away, who my mom was like my number one right hand man when it came to doing all this work. She would bring me to psychic fairs and public speaking events and stuff. But when
Nice.
she passed away, my dad kind of like took that space. And I remember doing this show in a theater. So, I was doing a talk and I was doing messages from spirit in the audience and stuff like that. And I guess in that moment, he saw like how helpful mediumship can be as a tool of healing. And it was after that that he was just kind of fell in love with the whole thing. It was pretty cool.
Okay, so it was like you not only were able to find a way to, create this much deeper and much more profound connection with your mother, but it also kind of provided sort of some, I guess you could say like a liberation or an awakening in your dad. So that's pretty badass.
It,
Um,
it did, yeah. And he started
how
having his own experiences like a few years ago himself, which I thought was pretty cool.
oh nice.
Yeah.
Nice. It does kind of, if you're doing it right, and you're on, it does kind of clear the veils around other people, and it does sort of provide that space, to maybe just see what you can do, which is really, really cool. And that kind of leads me to sort of, I guess, the second part of this question. When did you know that this was a psychic ability? Because sometimes we have special skills
Mm.
and we think that there's something else, like, oh no, that was just willpower, or that was just intuition. And I do draw a distinction between psychic ability and intuition. I know that's controversial. We can, if you want to talk about that, we can. But
Totally.
how did you know that this was magic? How did you know that this was extra normal?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I think in the beginning, I would say I didn't know what to think of it. Like I didn't really necessarily think much of it other than that I thought it was cool.
Mhm.
I think that I started to really realize, okay, like this is a talent of some kind when I was a teenager. And to put it a bit of backstory to it, I was about 12 or 13, and I went to my friend's house, and his name was JR, and his mom was super into all this stuff. And so she had tarot cards, and I thought, oh, what's that? And she said, oh, well, you can use it to work on yourself or to tell the future or look at the past or life lessons. And I thought, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard of. So I went to my grandmother and I said, I want tarot cards. And she, the little French Canadian 4-foot woman from New Brunswick, said, oh my God, that's amazing. Here's some money. Go buy go buy your tarot
Nice.
cards.
Oh,
And yeah, it was amazing. And then they sat in the bottom of my closet for a couple of years. And then one morning I woke up And I heard this voice clairaudiently, and it said, "Bring your cards to school." And I thought, well, like, where are they even? They sat in the bottom of my closet for years. So I dug them out and I looked at them and I thought, oh my God, this is so many cards to learn. And I've got this book and like, I don't know how I'm going to learn this by lunchtime. And the voice came back again and said, "Throw the book away. You don't need it." So I
Nice.
thought, all right, cool. So I brought the cards to school and I remember sitting in the library and I asked this girl that was sitting across from me, I said, "Hey, do you want a tarot card reading?" And she said, "Sure." And then she was like, "But I'm a Jehovah's Witness, so maybe don't tell anybody." So I
Oh
was like,
God.
"Cool, cool. All right, let's do this." So I shuffled the deck and just basically did what I saw on TV, like cut the deck, it didn't lay the cards out. And then the cards just started to speak to me. Like I started noticing things in the cards, and it was like this story started playing in my mind, and I was just describing what I was seeing. And I kept doing this like at lunch hour or whatever. And one day I I looked up while I was in the cafeteria. And also maybe it was a wake up call as well. And there was a lineup of people waiting for tarot readings. And then when teachers started to ask me for them, I was like, okay,
Oh
there's
wow.
like something about this. Maybe it's not something that everyone else is doing so easily. And then it just kept building from there, and I had more and more experiences with it. And I think so probably about like 16 years old is probably where I realized like this is sort of a talent.
What is it about the late 90s that did that to all of us? It
I
just
don't
kind of jump started. Because I know what you're talking about. It was something 98 to 2002 was like the quickening, I guess you could say. It was sort of like, all right,
And
you
that's
have your job.
exactly when it happened. Yeah, it would have
Yeah.
been, I would say like 2001, 2002, somewhere in there is when it kind of all started. And at the same time, I started seeing aura colors around people, and I didn't really know what to do with that. But thankfully, a guy that became my best friend at the time, he came from a family who was like very metaphysical. And
Mhm.
so rather than telling me what different colors could mean, he taught me at a young age, like, what does it mean to you? Like, what does the color make you feel? That's the meaning of the color that you see. And I think that I was really fortunate to have him as somebody who said that, or guided me in that way at that time. Because what I notice a lot of people fall into, especially when I'm teaching, is they'll see something and say, well, what does that mean? And the truth is, symbolism is best interpreted, as you know, by the person seeing it. And so I got to learn that at a young age, and it helped everything to unfold in a really cool way.
So, would I be maybe correct in inferring then that maybe you didn't have a formal coming out experience at all? You just kind of got to work?
That's pretty, yeah, I think that would be the way to put it. I never thought I never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, the closest thing to like a formal start that I think I had, at least a formal start where it became a career path, would have been when I was 17 or 18 years old, and I was taking this French class outside of school. And so our teacher, the teacher that I had other students, and he brought us all together to kind of do like a group practice one night.
Okay.
And it ended up coming up in that group practice that I could see auras. And, and there was a lady that said, "Oh, do mine." And I said, "Okay, cool." So I started doing her reading, and it was some pretty personal things. And she started crying and getting really emotional because it was talking about challenges and things that she hadn't really talked to people about yet. And the messages were positive. They were saying, all this is going to work out, just fine, just keep going. And when she left, the lady whose house we were all at turned to me and she was like, "That was awesome."
Nice.
And she was like, "I want you to come and do readings at my family reunion in a few weeks." And after I did that, then people started calling my parents' house from like all over Eastern Ontario. And it just sort of took off.
So there are all kinds of different ways to read tarot or read oracle, or runes or ogham or whatever people are choosing to manually divine with. And there's a lot of different ways, like I think, that we can actually put them to use. What are we looking at? Now, one of the things that I've observed in watching your readings is that you tend to grab a lot of more mediumship still kind of creeps in there in everything that you do, and you have a tendency to be able to pull information that is immediately applicable.
Hmm.
Would you say that the mediumship is sort of like the primary skill and everything else is sort of a mechanism that is sort of supplemental, or do you look at your skills as sort of three separate things? How does that work out for you? Because everyone's got a different method.
That's actually a really good question. So, if I'm being totally honest, the only reason I use like cards or tools is really just because it's on video and it gives people something to look at. But no, primarily everything comes from spirit with me. So even if I like pull out oracle cards or tarot deck or whatever, I will go with the traditional meanings of the cards, but it's really guided by spirit, almost like I know what the message is going to be before the
Yeah.
cards at the table. As I'm sure, and I'm sure you know exactly what that feels like.
You've already
Um,
got a guide with the cosmic
yeah,
perspective already, kind of like, this is where it's going to go, and I'm just going to give you a card to ground it for your
yeah.
listener.
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. And the idea to use cards on social media really just came from like people's suggestion of like maybe you should have something a little more visual for people to look at. And I've always loved cards. Like when I go and get readings done, I don't want to see someone like me. I want to go and see a tarot reader because I just find it amazing and phenomenal and I love it. But yeah, I think like for many of us, I'm sure, the tools are just an anchor point of our ability. It's something that makes it sort of tangible in the moment. But do we really need it? Probably not.
I think that it's a really good way to sort of, the way you jog your memory by bringing up all kinds of different circumstances or events around what you're trying to remember. I think the cards or the runes or whatever you're using are really good for jogging your psychic faculties. You
Well,
know,
it makes sense because it's sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
I interrupt
Um,
constantly. It's fine.
okay, cool.
I'm doing
Yeah,
really good today, though.
you are. I know. I feel like I'm the one that's like jumping in when I when you're talking. But yeah, no, I think it makes sense because if you think about what a card deck is, it's basically like a giant pile of reference points, right, for
Mhm.
things that we already have in our consciousness. So what you're saying makes complete sense to me.
Are there any spiritual paths or traditions or flavors that inform your experience? Or do you, maybe not necessarily identify, but are there certain things that maybe stick out?
That's a good question. Yeah, spiritualism for sure, and spiritualism in the sense of like the Spiritualist Church of Canada, Spiritualist National Union,
Right.
that type of spiritualism. That definitely is a big part of it for sure. I am a minister. I was originally trained as as a spiritualist minister, but I later became an interfaith minister. So that's a big one. I think there are definitely elements of Catholicism in there somewhere from my upbringing, but not necessarily. I wouldn't consider myself in any way Catholic or even necessarily Christian.
Mhm.
Other than that, I like the idea of loving everybody, and I wish I wish that you know, not to get into religious debate, but I wish that the people who are supposed to follow that would. Um,
Are there
and
any saints that, you connect to?
there is one. There's one that I had a really interesting experience with many years ago. Two actually. One is one called Saint Dymphna, who's the patron saint of people with anxiety and nervous disorders and mental health concerns.
I need you to write that one down for me.
I will. She's super cool. And years ago, I was at this like Catholic store just buying some candles because they make 7-day candles, and it was an easy thing to
Right.
do. So I went in there and I saw this like medal to Saint Dymphna, and I was like, what a weird name was my first thought. I'm like, what is that even from? So I went to there was books on the wall. So I went to the books and I looked it up and it said, oh, patron saint of people with nervous and mental disorders. And I was like, I'm going to buy 10 of these. Really, I just bought one. And I put it on my chain even before I walked out of the store. And you know what happened? Some massive, crazy healing occurred. And I would say within a few days, my anxiety that I was constantly struggling with, at least at that time, dissipated and it stayed gone for years.
Hmm.
And so that was one. And then the second one is a saint called Saint Francis of Assisi, who a lot of people have heard
Bit more
of,
commonly known, yeah.
more commonly known. Yeah, and I just thought, when I was learning about him, they said that he was ecumenical, which means that he would work with any Christian of any Christian faith or denomination. And I just never felt like that sat right with me because I felt like he was actually probably more interfaith or just didn't care and just wanted to help people. And
Right.
What I resonate with about him is a lot of the people that he took in who became his monks, over time, were people that were most definitely neurodivergent, just totally different, and definitely those days would have been very misunderstood. And I like that he just had this way of connecting with animals and people that were different, and he was very open-hearted and very much into bringing help to people, but also helping people to recognize their own divinity on some level with themselves. And so those are the two saints that I definitely feel pretty connected with.
Do you feel, that, when it comes to working with maybe guides or saints or deities, things like that, that these are forms that are assumed, but they all kind of still work with the same goal, regardless of the religion or the path that they are clothing themselves in?
100%. I've always felt, and this came at a pretty young age, this idea that God or the gods or whoever whoever's up there or around us, they will come to us in whatever way we can best understand it. And I think a lot of the time that understanding comes from the culture and traditions that we grow up in or that we find that resonate. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm of the belief that it doesn't really matter what you call it, it's going to be the same. And the reason that I believe that at a personal level is because I've gone to different religious institutions. I've taken part in different types of ceremonies and spiritual paths from a very earnest, like humble, loving place, just trying to understand it
Sure.
at a deeper level. And you know what happened? The same loving, profound energy was present in every single one of them that I went to. It was the same feeling that came forward. And I think I realized at that time, like, yeah, you know what? It's all kind of the same anyway, and it will just show up in whatever way we can, through whatever lens we can see it through. And I realized that at a pretty young age, and that belief has never changed for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be, if these are these truly, ascended, higher cosmic deity
Yeah.
levels of consciousness, the contrivances of the models that humans use to give themselves an illusion of order aren't that important to them.
No.
Just as we don't necessarily conspire to serve the mentality that runs the ant colony, I
Mhm.
don't think that they really care so much about what religions are going on Earth. And that is something that I've observed in my own practice as well. I've also worked with saints, in particular Saint Brigid, who's also, again, very much taken from the Celtic goddess Brigid or bride Brigantia. And she's one of my matrons. And I've also worked a bit with Saint Clare.
Mm.
And there is this sort of don't think about the clothing, remember the energy, remember the divine imperative, what comes primary in the divine priority, and don't get hung up on necessarily what the ants on the ground have done in the anthill, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And what's cool about that, and in pairing what you were saying with St. Clair, what's cool about that is she was like that. In fact, she was St. Francis of Assisi's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you already know that, but they were like this and they served together a lot. Yeah, and she was actually very like that as well. So it's cool.
Maybe that's our thing. Maybe that's our thing. And we can trade saints. I think it's great that I want to come back maybe in another chat about neurodivergence and
Sure.
mental health as relates to this, because I think that is a very important conversation to have, because I think there are a lot of things that are done right and a lot of things that are done wrong, both in the mundane but also in the metaphysical and personal development worlds. But we'll save that, because that's
That
that's
would
that's
be
a
a great conversation. I
yeah,
would love that.
huge conversation for another day. But I want to I want to bring you back for that for sure. Um, but I was going to ask you, since we are kind of now stepping into a space, where, we're talking about saints and religion and even mental health, we're kind of flirting with some tender areas for
Yeah.
people. Um, Not necessarily just isolated to those particular topics, but were there any concerns or insecurities or fears that you had to maybe overcome as you began to accept the fact that you were psychic, that you're a medium, and this is something that is you?
Mm. Yeah, I would say so. And so growing up, I grew up like my mom's side was very Catholic. My dad's side was very United Church or Protestant.
Mhm. How'd that
Excuse
happen?
I honestly, both my parents were party animals when they met. I don't think they cared.
Okay. I was like,
They
how
didn't care at all. No. But yeah, no, I think growing up, there definitely was this feeling that or fear maybe that I was somehow evil or, like there was something wrong with me.
Mhm.
And I would say I still have moments of that where I'm like, not where I think I'm evil or anything, but just like there's something, something's a little weird. Why am I so sensitive to everything or
Right.
whatever? But yeah, growing up, I mean, when I was 11, the school principal called my parents because he was concerned that I was somehow a witch. And I don't think many people get that phone call, post like 1700s. So
Right.
it was kind of weird. So there was definitely this sort of feeling like an outcast. Absolutely. I think that the older I got, the more I embraced it, and I was also bullied pretty heavily as a kid, and so I think as I started realizing, like, okay, this is something that makes me a little bit different than some of the other people I go to school with. I think I actually embraced it. I think I found, um, a sense of empowerment in that what I perceived at the time as a uniqueness, because in my small town there was like me and like two older ladies who were psychics, and that was it.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that I hooked on to that as a way of defending myself or protecting myself. There was an element of people were a little nervous about what I might be capable of, and I think as a young kid who was bullied, I think I jumped all over all over
Yeah.
that. But
Oh, yeah.
as I got older, I think that I realized that A, it's meant to be for service, right? To help people, and B, that every single person on the planet has the capability to do these things, at least in my experience. And I think when all the things that I felt special about in a sense when I was younger, as I got older, that shifted into a more humble space for me. And I started just wanting to help other people to figure out their gifts or at the yeah, to figure out their gifts, but also to show people they're not alone. And I think that might be, at least for me, the biggest thing that I try to do for the world is to show people that whatever happens on their path, whatever crap they have to walk through, they're not walking through it by themselves. I
So
know
it's
that's a
kind of like you're
long answer.
you're but you decided to walk around as sort of an embodiment, like
Yeah,
your role. I don't believe in a singular life purpose. I don't believe
sure.
in anything. I think that's just kind of invented to keep people out of trouble and take their money at the same time.
Really,
But I do.
me
But
too.
it sounds like you've decided to kind of dawn or endow yourself with a very important role of just kind of reminding everyone of the bigger cosmic picture, which I think is actually really good.
Yeah, it's something that really calls to my heart, and that really started, even before I knew that this is, what I would be doing later in my life. I think as a kid, like I always felt like it's gonna sound so weird, probably, well, actually probably not. Look who I'm
Try
talking
me.
to. Right. Um, when I was a kid, like I don't remember ever not praying. And it wasn't even because people told me to do it. I mean, obviously at some point they said this is how you pray. But as a kid, I always remember talking to God or the universe or whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
and that's something that it was there my whole life, and the more that I've built a relationship with that presence in my life, the more I wished that for other people. And there were times where I had hit such a rock bottom, and I felt this loving presence all of a sudden that would just come out of nowhere, almost like to save the day, kind of a feeling. And I often thought, like, what if everybody could feel that? Like, what if everybody got to know how surrounded we actually are and how supported we actually are? And it just kind of just kept happening and led me to ministry and all of these things. And I agree with you. I don't think that we have a singular life purpose. I think our purpose is who we are,
Right.
and we can choose to do whatever we want with our path. I think our purposes are energetic in nature. I think we are an anchor of a specific type of vibration on the earth plane. And I mean, we could talk forever.
Well, no,
Probably.
but I think we should come back and do that. I think that we would have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it does look like it sounds like you have decided to take this in the direction of more of a healing
Yeah.
kind of imperative, which is, I'll be honest, and this might be a controversial opinion. I believe you when you say that. I don't believe other people when they say that a lot of the time.
Well, thank
And I think that we need more people like you who are well-founded, well-practiced, sincere, and well-connected, spiritually speaking. And, I think that in the wake of sort of this awakening craze where there's a whole lot of trivia and not a whole lot of connection, I do believe that people like you are going to finally get a chance to have your day in this coming decade. I think that, you're already doing your work. Now, I think people are going to start realizing your work and realizing the difference between the natural organic practice, being actively engaged, metaphysical, paranormal, spiritual, magical, and treating it like an exercise. And so, I think you're going to be getting very big here within the next 5 years.
you.
Very, very big. I know you're
I
not doing it for fame either, which is why you deserve it. You're not doing it for emotional affirmation or attention or to, get people's energy or whatever the hell, or fill a void. So you are getting it because you deserve it.
Well, I appreciate that. And likewise to you as well. I think if I'm being totally honest, like the way that I look at it, because I do enjoy social media as we talked about earlier, I love that.
Mhm.
But the way that I look at it is like, okay, well, I've had some really hard things happen in my life, like everybody, some really hard stuff. And I just always think like, well, when I'm in a really hard place, if I saw somebody on Facebook that was in a hard place or they had just been through it or whatever, and they were able to talk about it, then maybe I wouldn't feel so alone. And I think that's where like a big part of my drive also comes from for wanting to help people is just like everyone goes through stuff. And I used to be one of those people that tried to look like I had it all together. And I mean, I had two TV series in my 20s and got to do these really cool things. And back then when I look back, like I was kind of fake. Like I was real with my abilities, but I was fake with who I was as a
Mhm.
person, because the truth is I didn't have anything together. I was like a write-off outside of the TV studio. Um
It's, but it's natural to want those things too.
it
I've found myself, entertaining jealous thoughts of the TV magic queers myself. And I'm like,
I
if
know,
I had that.
I
So
know.
it's okay. It's,
It totally is. Yeah, I think so. But I really felt like I actually became who I act, my true self after I couldn't hide my weaknesses anymore. And I think it was at that moment where I was like, you know what, actually, like I think I just want to be myself and when I do all of this stuff. And I realized too, like the more yourself you are, the better you are as a medium or a psychic or whatever. You can actually I think there's an element of vulnerability as or an element of one's power lying in their vulnerability in terms of this work. I think that when we want to have a conversation with the universe, or as I like to call it, shake down the universe for other people for answers.
right.
I think when we want to do that, if we approach the universe as our truest self, consciously our truest self, then we actually can recognize truth in the universe at a deeper level. And that's one thing, at least in my path, that I've realized in becoming. Yeah.
Well, and I think, I'm kind of curious, because there is sort of a pressure, I
Mm,
think, especially if you're going into this with the intention of being a healer.
mm,
Now, I'm not, I if my work is incidentally healing, that's great, but that's not my imperative.
mm.
Um, but I think there is a pressure to heal, and there's even more pressure on people who are going in as healers
Yeah. Huge.
to kind of assess where and what the demand, what the need, where the hurt is, and sort of choreograph your presentation, your skills, and your availability to that. Where's the room for the natural? where's the room for the organic? How, is it really just about the buzzwords? Is it about everyone saying the same thing? I don't think we're going to be here much longer. I do think that, especially once we get Pluto into Aquarius in March of next year, it's kind of the end of modular living. And it's the beginning of, all right, look, the people who have the real skills, the people who are coming at it, who are, true of heart, and the people that are naturally connected and already engaged without the cookie cutter stuff, that's your time, So even if you kind of feel like, oh, I did this and I think the fakeness was, we've all been fake at times.
Totally.
Not fake with our abilities, but maybe fake in our presentation.
Yes.
And I often find that the fakeness has to do with when you're doing it with good intentions, you're doing it because you think you're being socially responsible. You're seeing the demand, you're trying to meet it. Okay, this is what seems to be most needed, even though it's not necessarily my way.
Yeah.
This is the way to connect to people. This is what people respond to. If you're doing it the bad way, then you're just doing it for money or adulation. But I mean, I don't know. I think that if you've come to a point where it's like you're already at home in your skills and your abilities, you're going to be fine. You're going to be, I do see big things for you. I really do.
Well, thank you. And likewise, by the way, I think that you have a really authentic way of being. And I think the things that you talk about with people, because obviously I'm a fan of yours, and that's true. And I think the thing that you bring to people and I guess realistic side of things and I think you bring, and this, I don't know how to say this without sounding terrible because I don't mean it to be, you bring a plainness that is really vitally important. Like not a plainness, but a like you take really complicated things and you make them really understandable and really relatable. And I think that's beautiful. And I love the way that you do that with some really big concepts. And yeah, plainness isn't the word. Maybe
I don't know if there's a word that
I don't think there's a word.
I don't
No.
mind saying making it plain. I don't mind if somebody says you're making it plain or you're making it
It's a
correct, or
compliment. It's a
it's
compliment.
because okay, for me, I guess again, because like I don't believe in a singular life purpose, but for me, my whole thing is make it real for people.
That's it. That's what you do. Not plain. You make it real and
That's
relatable. I think this is the word. You make things relatable.
it's important. Yeah, it's important, I think, because again, it doesn't serve the population to just turn this into another self-help metaphor, because it's not. And if you are naturally psychic, you're kind of like, wow, this is done so wrong. But you're also in a space where you making it real for people, because sometimes people make it impossible because it's overcomplicated, it's too lofty. And
True.
sometimes people make it impossible because it's there's almost like there's a mundaning, not a word, but there's a mundaning of the experience that doesn't work. And so for me, I kind of feel like, all right, let's make it real. And part of the things that I offer people is like, I'm going to freak you out. I was in the UK at a retreat in the Peak District. This was, I want to say 2014, 2015. I can't remember because I went twice. I can't remember. I think it was the 2014 one. And I was basically doing a ceremony, opening up a portal, pulling down veils. And people were seeing orbs. We were all seeing the same orbs, by the way. So it's like we could all point to the same one of these little pixies, little green and turquoise and blue orbs dancing around the grass in the Peak District. And I'm always saying, like, look, magic is real. Get over your fear of magic, because this is what I think is going on with this awakening. And I think a lot of the stuff that people have been talking about have not really given you the opportunity for this. It's just a very interesting, but that's kind of where, I like to go. I make it real for people. You make it open for people. And I think that's maybe, again, that's the St. Clair making it real, right? Everything's about the eyes with her. And that's where your St. Francis comes in.
Yeah, making it available. Yeah,
make it
no,
available.
I think it's true. I think that's a good way to look at it, actually. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a huge paradigm as well. There is a huge paradigm that is shifting in our world. And I think like the fakeness for me before, especially was like if people don't see that I have the perfect life, then they're not going to take me seriously. And then I realized along the way that like nobody has a perfect life. And I think it's better that we just be ourselves and things
Well,
like that.
I
Yeah.
think that I think that people who need to see you have the perfect life and say the words that they become comfortable with,
Yeah.
or, you know, show off your fancy apartment with your or the trip you took with your boyfriend or whatever. Um, I think that people that need that to feel secure are not really shifting the way they think they are.
Agreed. And
I
that's
think,
exactly what I realized over time as well, is
and
that
I'm okay with being the controversial one. I'm like,
yeah, you're good at it though.
we're the same age. I was Daria in high school, so it's like that's how it goes.
Yeah,
It's I don't think they're shifting. I think that they're the types of people that will go wherever the hype commands them to go. And this just happened to be what was hyped this last 10, 12 years.
think you're right about that. And I do think there are people who are genuinely awakening for sure.
Yes.
I mean, in numbers that I haven't personally seen before, but I think you can always tell which ones really are because usually the ones that are that they call and they're like, hi, so I'm like completely losing my mind and I don't know why, but I feel everything and everything's so, I'm so sensitive to everything
Mhm.
and I keep feeling like there's like people talking to me when I'm trying to sleep. And do you do that?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it sounds like you're waking up a little bit.
Right.
Um, and I find that beautiful. I don't know about you and in terms of your beliefs, but I always feel at a inner knowing level that we are as humans and beings and a world and a universe and a dimension that we're always like moving towards a higher point of light as individuals and as a collective. And I think it's somewhere in that journey we hit these thresholds in time where a lot begins to happen, things really heat up, and I really feel like we are kind of in one of those thresholds where we're about to see a lot more happen at a human level and at a
I th-
spiritual level.
I think so. I absolutely think so. I think yeah, I don't debate that there is a huge shift in consciousness
Yeah,
happening. I just don't think it's happening in the way people are treating it.
agreed.
I
I,
think that when it is all about healing and politicized self-help programs and personal development movements, and fighting off evil spirits with yoga and green juice, there's something wrong.
yeah.
There's a bastardization or a capitalization. I think that this is the season of the witch.
Mm,
I think that this, which is why I also think to a certain degree, and maybe this is a little overly suspicious on my part, but I think that that's why people who tend to be more naturally gifted or disciplined in their practice and live this,
mm,
right? It's not a lifestyle, it's a way of life,
yes.
um, are more marginalized than people who are kind of following the more sensational crowds, and the plastic and
Yeah.
the Kens and Barbies.
It makes sense though, because if you think about, in a sense, like healing or bringing healing to people, bringing wisdom to people, insight, knowledge, whatever you want to call it, it is disruptive. I mean, if you think about it, like we are disruptors as people. We disrupt in order to promote flow, but ideally or maybe quintessentially is a better word, like we're pains in the ass of society. That's why part of why we're here probably
I
is
mean,
that we shift the way that people think and we challenge that herd mentality.
oh yeah.
And that will always make us kind of outcasts a little bit, I think, on some level, and we always have been,
Mhm.
since the beginning of time, really.
Well, and that's kind of, I think, the thing that we need to be okay with.
Oh,
I think that if you're going to progress in anything, you have to accept your uniqueness. I think that everyone on earth is an outcast, and I think that that means outcasts don't exist. I think that obsession with commonality or even relatability to a certain degree is somewhat self-effacing. It's somewhat narcissistic. I think that it's important to accept your uniqueness,
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
makes you different. It's kind of like, okay, when you talk about neurodivergence,
Mm.
for instance, I've been very transparent and very open on, over the years on this channel and on my, my bigger channel, Son of Selene, about having, clinical OCD. So being neurodivergent, that's kind of my thing. And if I'm going to work on myself, I have to accept the fact that I have to accept what makes me unique in
Yes.
that way. I can't go about things the same way somebody who doesn't have OCD does. And the things that help somebody with, say, depression or ADHD, or, maybe they're on the spectrum, will not help me. And I think that that's okay. I just got to accept the fact that I'm different. And they
Yeah.
have to accept the fact that they're different. And I think that we're kind of coming into a space now where the obsession with relatability and sameness for safety has
Mhm.
got to go. And otherwise, it's going to be more identity driven and less actual growth and evolution.
Oh, hugely. And actually, you talking in your videos in the past about your own neurodivergence is one of the things that totally drew me to you in the first place. And I just thought that was honestly refreshing because I hadn't met anybody else who had talked about it before seeing you in our work, right, in our field of weirdness. I hadn't really had anyone to talk to about it, and your videos actually gave me this really big sense of being able to breathe a lot back then. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, there's a bit of a stigma, even in the spiritual personal
Oh,
development community. I kind of run from the personal development community personally. I don't like spending time over there. I'm kind of like, as far as I'm concerned, you guys invaded. But I've kind of noticed, you know, there's kind of a stigma about embracing, I mean, OCD is kind of, it's not rare, but it's not common.
right.
And it's not the sexy one. Sexy nowadays is like, bipolar. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that to be insulting. I'm saying that as
Even
somebody with a
even
mental,
yeah.
differential, acknowledging that, or ADHD is sexy.
Yeah.
OCD is not sexy. It's not in. It's very, OCD is not very fashionable.
Mm.
But so people choose, what they accept. But an example of, I think, some of the block that you're talking about, where it's like, I don't think I could breathe in this. I don't think I can embrace this. I remember, I was at a psychic fair and that was going on just about half an hour north of Seattle.
Mm.
This was 2018. Yeah, I
Mhm.
want to say 2018. There's a psychic fair. It was at a fairly nice hotel. They just took a big conference room, and the usual fare. 1,001 tarot readers, 1,001 crystal vendors. There was this really cool guy who was he painted these kind of like stained glass talismans. You hang them in your window. They're beautiful. All kinds of different, blessings and symbols and sigils in them. And, he was choosing to use a lot of the new age vernacular. So, light codes and things like that, which, I'm like, okay, that's your code. That's what you want to say. I'll say blessing. It's all good. Um, and he was selling these things, and I was asking him all kinds of different questions, because he was the most interesting person at the fair to me. And I was just drawn, and I got a couple of these, which were not cheap, by the way. And I was there was one that was kind of like, that was geared towards um slowing and repelling
Yeah.
what he was saying was, sort of unwanted or unintentional information. And I said, oh my God, this would be a really cool thing to, to talk about with the discussion of involuntary, intrusive thoughts, like with OCD. And I was talking about my OCD. And his boyfriend was just like, why would you claim that? And I was like, because I'm not running from my past,
Or
bitch,
myself.
or myself.
Right.
your boyfriend's
Oh,
too good for you. I didn't say that. I wanted to. I would be like, you're too good for him. But
I
you
would have
know,
probably said it,
yeah.
knowing me.
But it's,
Uh,
it's just interesting. It's just interesting.
It is, and I think we should have an entire discussion at some point about neurodivergence in our work, because I think that a lot of people probably are neurodivergent,
Mhm.
and either don't know it or don't want to talk about it. I hid my learning disabilities for most of my life. It was a few years ago that I actually like let the wall down, and then I let the wall down about being autistic, and that was, a lot. It was a lot of There was a lot of fear on my part when it came to starting to talk about those things. And then what happened is that everyone was cool with it. I don't know why I thought they would be judgmental or like weird or not believe me or something, but it was the opposite. I found that a lot of people that followed my page, for example, a lot of their kids were had learning disabilities, or they had ASD or something like that. And so it actually became like a really cool synergy started happening that
Yeah.
I was very grateful for. Mhm.
Do you do you often find that, when it comes to right making things, just kind of cutting the crap and getting real with people,
Yeah.
um, is easier now than it was even maybe 5 or 6 years ago?
Oh, hugely. Yeah. Because it was in 2014 that I was like, you know what? I don't have the energy to pretend to be living the perfect life anymore. So that was
Yeah.
when that happened. And I would say it's only gotten easier. In fact, there are still moments, of course, like everybody, I'm sure, where I'm like, oh, I feel insecure about this aspect of myself or what I'm going through. And
Yeah.
I think we all have that on some level. But yeah, I would say, like, even with that in tow, like, yeah, in the last 2 years, I would say, at least for me, I've just not cared anymore. And I think it's one thing that, like, chronic illness has taught me is, like, put your energy where it's gonna be useful.
Yeah.
And so I didn't find it useful to cater anymore, or fit into a box anymore. And I think that's at least how it manifested for me in my life.
I don't think it's healthy, the way we kind of do or have done. Like I said, and I see it changing. I think
Yeah.
it's changing for the better because I think a lot of the trending and a lot of the trenders and a lot of the distortions are going away. But I I I think that ironically, the intent to heal and connect and have therapeutic experiences with a whole bunch of anonymous strangers is what precipitates more illness.
Mm,
And I think that we are going into a space where real spiritual work, real growth, but also again, yes, as it relates to mastering what makes you different,
mm.
you know, makes you neurodivergent. Uh and getting more intimate with that without necessarily having it have to be around identification with a group. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
really hang out with other OCD people. I don't think that would work, but and not saying that in a bad way. It's just,
No.
again, it's a bit more uncommon, and we don't all have the same needs. But getting into a space where it's that personal mastery beyond personal development, it's personal embrace, spiritual embrace. I think that it can't happen when it's all about losing yourself in the collective web.
Agreed. Agreed. I think so too. And I think there is for sure an element of oneness in spirituality and growth,
Yes.
but there's not a loss of individuality even in the oneness either. Like, I don't think they're competing. I don't think our individual uniqueness is competing with the ability to be a part of the collective,
No.
um, at all. And I think you're right. A lot of people do lose that the same way that people try to get rid of their ego. And like, that's not, I mean, ego is a part of our hardwiring as
Yeah.
humans. we can't get rid of that. In fact, it's very important that we don't, so that we're not like, oh wow, I'm falling off a cliff, must be meant to be.
Yeah.
Smack. I think we need all of these aspects of ourselves, and our individuality is a big part of that, especially if we do look at the fact that we all do bring something different to the world, and that's important. That difference, that diversity is actually vital to the unfolding of this crazy three-ring crap show circus of life.
Well, it's the thing is, I mean, look at the human body.
Yeah.
One body, but you're not comprised exclusively of red blood cells.
No,
It
exactly.
wouldn't work.
No.
And so, you might be a red blood cell, you might be a nerve cell,
Yeah.
might be a white blood cell. Hell, we could both be brain cells, except you are working in the hippocampus and I'm working in the hypothalamus.
Totally.
We are all contributing to the whole and we are connected. But I think that in order to properly contribute to the whole and connect healthily, it requires an understanding of what sets you apart and what makes you unique.
Totally.
And not in sort of the overcompensating, like, again, kind of wounded narcissist way where it's just sort of flag waving, but more in a way where it's, I embrace myself and I have complete mastery of it.
Yeah.
There are advantages. I'm sure you've even well, advantages in the right way to learn, but even getting out of the realm of the spiritual and talking about the mundane, there are certain tricks you learn when you embrace, say, for instance, your neurodivergence.
Yes.
I can't, do things, I can't drink caffeine and go to sleep like my friends with ADHD do. I would love to be able to have a sleep potion that was a Red Bull, but that doesn't work for me. You could just decide to go to sleep whenever you want, just have some caffeine. My God, that's awesome. Or for OCD, that I've learned to actually kind of work that in.
Yeah.
Not necessarily with my readings, absolutely not. But as far as, I let the alarm system that is OCD kind of be sort of my barometer of when, maybe a psychic attack or an energy violation or something is amiss. And I just kind of let it be there, like a Star Trek red alert. And I'm sure you've found, maybe being on the spectrum, there are just some things that you are able to, you kind of not use in conjunction with your spiritual skills, but use to kind of maybe get you to employ your spiritual skills, to maybe check something out. Does that make sense? It's like hacking instinct.
100%. Like, for example, I have what's called a working memory deficit, which means that, like, so working memory is like if you're doing math, for example, complex math, so you have to hold one idea here or one value while you work out something over here, and then you stick them together. So the part that holds things over here, I don't have. So it makes me a great channel because I can only hold one concept at a time in my head. And so if you think about the way channeling works is you are basically not holding on to any information, you're just allowing it to come through, and not having a working memory makes that pretty easy
That
because I
is
only
that would
be
actually be
aware of.
very advantageous, yeah, because there
Yeah.
is just there it really cuts down on the noise.
And at the end of it, I have no idea what the hell my 1 hour talk was about, but people said they liked it and it was helpful for them. So
That's
good.
reassuring. I was gonna say, just to kind of, maybe close up, are there any suggestions that you would give to people that, maybe know this about themselves, but don't necessarily know what to do about culturing it and developing it organically? Where do they need to start?
So learning is in the doing, really. Like if you're wanting to, because everybody starts off natural born. We start off somewhere, but that's not where we stay. Like any other talent, skill, even when you're a natural at it, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yes.
And so my advice always is to not focus forever on theoretical how does this work, but actually just use your ability. Now, I wish somebody would have taught me when I was younger how to ground myself and how to shield myself and how to clear my energy field. So I would say definitely get those tools on board as soon as possible. But other than that, honestly, just see where it takes you and not be afraid of it, and understand that if there are moments where you're freaked out by your own abilities or experiences, there are a lot of us who have already gone through that and are happy to help.
And I think it is possible to get to the how. I like
Totally.
to talk about how things happen, but you're
Mhm.
right. You can't figure out how first. The people who
No,
can talk about how and make it real are people who have done the work and realized how. They didn't
exactly.
study how, and there is a big difference.
Hugely. And I think that everybody can awaken these abilities within themselves. I mean, I've had people in my courses who are like, I don't even know what a tarot card does, like, or whatever. And
Well, it's
by the
technically just cardstock, so
right.
and it holds a picture.
It does. Often pretty ones, although some are not.
Some are
Um
cheap, but not
so-
good.
but yeah, yeah, and I've seen that people like that come in and just say, well, I just, I saw Teresa Caputo on TV one day and I thought I want to do that. And so they came for classes. And a lot of those people, I mean, it wasn't overnight. They really devoted time and energy to
Mhm.
developing it. But they did, and a lot of them are working, out there in the world doing this work, a lot of them even professionally. And so I really believe that everyone has the faculties to make it work. But for those of us who have awakened naturally, either at birth or at some point in our lives, yeah, I think learn how to ground yourself, learn
Yeah.
learn the difference between fifth dimensional or true spirit and like weird astral garbage heap stuff.
Mhm.
And then yeah, just keep going. And we'll
I
keep
would
doing
love to talk about that as well at some
sure.
point
Yeah,
because
anytime.
yeah, we'll talk about that later. Oh, I wish I could keep you on forever and ever and ever, but
We'll
I
do this again
can't
for sure.
today. Good. We should do this again for sure.
Agreed.
So, we're going to, I guess, love you and leave you, everyone, for the moment. And thank you so much again, Matthew, for coming by and chatting. This has been phenomenal. And much love to you and your partner. And if there's anything you ever want to come back with soon, please do, because I like I said, you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you for having me. This has been really, really awesome, and getting to have this conversation with you, and just hear more about your perspective and your ideas has been really, really awesome for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you. No, I mean, we'll definitely keep in touch, and you never know, maybe once people are a little bit more okay with getting out there, we should do an event sometime. Love to have you come out, or we can meet somewhere in the middle and you know put
That
on a
would
show.
that would be super fun. You got it.
Awesome. Well, Matthew, thank you so much again for dropping by. And everybody, if you are, if this isn't enough, Matthew, which I can't imagine it would be, please check out the links in the down bar below to his Facebook page, as well as his website. He does all kinds of different mediumship development programs. And also, if you're interested in checking out his Oracle deck, you can also find that on his website. And what day do you do your free readings, Matthew?
It is usually Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time ish, or ask if I feel fancy, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, around 7 p.m. Eastern time, Monday nights.
All right. So 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. I'm West Coast, so I'm always a little bit, like, hold on, let's do it. But awesome. Yeah, no, you guys have, check him out. He's the real deal, all natural, all organic, and he is here with the mission, so to speak. And he's gonna blow your mind. So you guys take care. Thank you again for dropping by. Thank you again for hanging out, Matthew, and we will do this again real soon.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Take care.
You too.